Well, we lived on whatever we raised on the farm, like eggs and meat, our own meat and potatoes and vegetables. We lived better than we do now. Far nicer food, real good food then. And I can remember when we used to take the eggs to shovel and they'd want us to take the full amount in groceries, you know. And we couldn't eat the full amount because I baked all my own stuff and that. I remember buying 7 or 8 cans of salmon, 10 cents for a little tin of salmon, just to have on hand, and stuff like that. You could get 5 pounds of dates for 25 cents. You could get 5 pounds of brown sugar for 25 cents. It wouldn't be like, you know, you didn't need to spend much money, and you needed it. You needed your money for more than food. We had about 15 cows, I guess, milking. It was enough for 2 to milk. Often milked 10 myself. When we farmed, the last part of the farming was my husband drove a cream truck to make a little extra money, and he used to have to start at 1 o'clock in the morning and be back by 10 o'clock before the inspectors would get there, or they'd turn down the milk, the cream, you know. So I used to get up about 6 o'clock and get the cows in, and I'd milk them all myself, load the milk into the back of the car, the cans, and take it to shovel. Come back, and then I'd have my breakfast about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. That I got along good. I liked that. Sure, I enjoyed every minute. I'd go back to farming again quick. I'm too old to go back. But I enjoyed it.
I used oxen until I was 25 years old. In fact, we done the most of our farm work with oxen then. Yes, the horses is quicker, but they wasn't any surer than the oxen was. And I done most of my work with oxen on the farm until I was about 30. Then I began to use the horses more. And today, instead of using the horses, we have to have 2 automobiles.
Yeah, horsepower now.
Yes,
horse tractors.
To do work with. Radio, I don't do any work. I haven't done any work for speak of for 10 years.
We got the cows in and milked them, and we had about, I think, around 10 at that time. And we done all the chores, feeding the calves and the pigs and everything like that. And then we done a regular day. It was in the spring. We done plowing and sowing seed. Cut the seed later on, the hay, and it was just a regular farm job, that was all.
We always kept sheep and sheared them. I always thought they were a double profit. You had the little lambs and you had the wool. It was mixed farming all around here. Everything. There was woodlots, and they did wood in the winter, and dairy farming.
Milk cows and the young cattle and the cows, well, they'd keep the heifer cows and they'd sell the bulls and yes, sheep and pigs, oh yes. And pork was selling for about $4 a hundred, breast pork. Now it sells as much as $48 a hundred.
We used to have to go and get the cows from the pasture between 5 and 6 o'clock and bring them to the barn, and of course had to milk them all by hand in those days. And then my father, we used to make butter, churn butter, and well, we had the old-fashioned churns that we turned by hand, put the sour cream in the churn, turn those by hand. And then, I think it was on Friday, my father would take the butter to turn it into the stores there on grocery bill. We didn't buy too many in those days, just the necessities.
Oh, I had to do the boys' work.
You had to do the boys' work because there were no boys.
Oh, no boys.
Oh, you mean you could pitch hay?
Oh, I could. And
Did you milk cows?
I could milk the cows. And
Did you have to shovel the barns?
No.
You didn't have to do that?
Oh, no.
Because that's dirty work. Did you look after chickens?
Oh, indeed, yes.
Chickens.
And my mother like to look after the chickens.
Yeah, that's sometimes thought to be the woman's side of the work. Make butter?
Oh, yes. Oh, butter, yes.
Yeah. Did you make bannock?
Bannock?
Or you make scones?
Scones.
You make scones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we make scones.
You get up first thing in the morning at 5:30 or so and get the cows, get them in. That was always the first job of the day. Some people used to have their breakfast before they'd go to the barns, but we never here when I came here either. You'd get up and get the cows in and get them milked and separate the milk and send it, take it out and feed the calves or the pigs, whatever you did with the milk. And then after that, you'd go and have your breakfast, and then you'd get the horses harnessed and start to cut the hay or cultivate the corn. You went through it with a little cultivator with a horse and to keep the weeds down. Today they use sprays, of course, but we didn't use any sprays. The farmer in those days, a lot of these things we didn't know about if they were there. I doubt that they were anyway, but you certainly, you did what you could yourself, and you didn't spend that only what you had to do, what you had to spend. Otherwise you did all the work you could. And in the daytime too, you'd have, if it was a rainy day, you'd have to say, well, go and fix fences. I mentioned earlier he worked in BC where he worked in the rain day and all day and times, so the rain was no reason for him to say well, we won't do anything today, it's too wet, sort of thing. It was a day, and I recall him even having us go down and weed the garden, hoe the garden in the rain. Well, he seemed it got the weeds removed somehow anyway, but it wouldn't, you'd walk on it with the hoe and you'd think you'd replant some of it, but anyway, he managed it. It worked anyway. His theory was important anyway, that you work at least. And I don't consider him a slave driver or anything like that. He was just a hard worker and expected to set an example by teaching you how to work as well.
They used all kinds of horses. Some people had heavy horses, and others usually have pretty good teams. Yeah. Oh, well, yes, there's some that has used a lot of Belgian horses for heavy work, and others would like not so heavy. And most everybody had, them days had a good driving team. Yes, for driving, Yeah. But around for work horses, we wanted 1,200 anyway, and 1,600 horses. They had good teams in them days.
You sold your pigs, you kept one to eat and sold the rest. And then you sold eggs and you killed your chickens. But there was no way, you couldn't kill a bunch in advance because there was no cold storage. Well, the pig was put down in salt in a barrel, and it was salt pork. And then in the wintertime when it get cold, they'd kill a cow. And that was generally putting the oats in the granary.
Buried up in the grain, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, you hang it on the barn floor till it freeze good and solid, then we take it and put it in the oat. And it never thaw out, in the grain.
And I remember as a child going to my grandparents just up the road here, and them sending us out to the ice house. And in the wintertime, they used to bring blocks of ice from the river and cover it with sawdust. And they had this big bin, and it was full of ice and sawdust. And then they'd have ice nearly all summer. So we used to like to go out to dig out the block of ice to put in the ice box. I remember grandfathers too, they built like a box on the bottom of the ice house. And Grandma used to keep the butter and stuff in there. But then she had a milk house made of stone down in the face of the hill.
In the spring.
And that's where the preserves and they bought the cheese in big round circles like this.
And I went into chicken farming and market gardening. So I was the first market gardener in this area. I used to deliver all around the lakes, even Lake Ed, with a horse and buggy. I just had 3 acres, but I grew a lot.
Yes, they planted by the moon. You tell some of the young fellows that today, and they'll say you can't plant nothing on the moon, it won't grow. But you plant it in the ground by the moon, and you'll get the crop that you ask for, no change. You take when the moon is growing, you want a lot of flowers, like that, you plant it when the moon's growing. And vegetables and stuff like that you're looking, potatoes or so forth, carrots, whatever it may be, Plant that when the moon is growing and grow all the tops and no bottom. But vice versa, you plant them when the moon's wasting away and they'll go to bottoms and not much top.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, we used to raise quite a lot of apples, and I used to had an old horse. I could drive pretty well, and I used to take a load of them apples to asbestos and peddle them out. Well, I'd pick up quite a little change that way, you know, 25 cents for a good-sized bale, and it was always good sales for apples up to asbestos.
We used to grow about 1,000 bushel of potatoes, and we had lots of wood and timber. That's what we lived on. 2 horses. There was no teamwork then, one behind the other. No reins on them. You just jumped on your own front load, and he followed you no matter where you went in the city, and nobody driving them or looking after them. We kept them about 11 cows. Used to make butter and sell butter when we had a surplus, and used to raise pigs too, you know. What they could feed. They didn't figure on buying much feed for them, what they could grow, and they'd sell some. Oh yes. They'd probably raise 35 pigs in a year like that.
The land was very stony and very poor land, so that you had to put an awful lot of fertilizer and manure on it to get a crop. But we grew wonderful potatoes and root vegetables, and we grew everything we ate. We even ground our own wheat. We were different in that. We did, other people didn't grow wheat, but we did. And you spent your summer putting things away in jars, and beans and applesauce and stuff for the winter. So when it was hot and you wanted to be out swimming, you were in the house putting away winter food.
The vegetables were put in the cellar, kept in a cool cellar, and they'd keep pretty well through the winter. Yeah. Turnips, carrots, beets, potatoes, apples, dried apples for pies. Peel them and quarter them and string them on cord and hang them to dry. My mother used to hang them up over the kitchen. The stovepipe from the kitchen went up through we used to call it up the shed stairs. You'd go through up the stairs from the shed and over the kitchen. She used to have lines of apples strung. Well, a lot of them used to string them right, hang them behind the stove in the kitchen.
When they had the sugar bush down here, they used to carry that syrup in 2 wooden buckets. They're handmade buckets on a yoke. Mr. Hayes used to carry that from the sugar bush home. That'd be, he'd have maybe 5-6 gallons of syrup, and he'd carry that home on this yoke on his shoulders. But the sap, well, they gathered the sap with a team, yes. Puncheons. He never had a big storage tank. He just had puncheons, and they stored the sap in the puncheons, and then he had to bale this sap into the evaporators as they required it, as the syrup simmered down. Oh, people, a lot of them didn't have very many conveniences.
Oh, there's so very few farmers now in this district. Hardly anybody that farms anymore. There just wasn't enough money in it, and it's a job that you depend on the weather. Springs are late now, and it just doesn't pay anymore. Unless a big outfit with good, expensive machinery and all that stuff. But the weather has so much to do with it. Well, the boys weren't going to stick around the farm, 7-day-a-week job. No, it's a pretty discouraging job, but if you just get set up with one kind of machinery, well, then combines come in. First was, if you got a hay loader, you were all set, that was great. Well, then it was the balers, and then now combines, and those machinery are up in the thousands of dollars. It really has to be a big farmer to be able to afford it.